Okay, we're back to this. We're gonna drudge our way through it.
I'll follow on Director Kim's comments. As a practical matter, this board cannot bind a future board on fare increases. As my understanding is, it's going to be part of every budget, and so we can't, by any vote or any action on our part, dictate fare increases in September of 2024. Right? We're going to be approving a budget that will go through the middle of 2024, not through September. So unless you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think as a practical matter, this board only has an impact on fares through mid-calendar year 2024. So I'll say make that. Is that incorrect?
I was just going to note that we have and do frequently take board actions that have impacts in future years. Mm-hmm. So we can do that. But you're right, the mechanism for approving the money, but this would be a revenue coming into the agency rather than an expenditure under Oregon budget law.
Right.
Yeah.
But
so you could do an ordinance in the spring that would, I mean, and we've done that in the past because we need the time to get ready for a fair increase, marketing it, making the changes that Nancy described. So you could do it.
So there could be an ordinance that would indicate a fair increase after the middle of 2024.
Correct. And then you're right that the board again would approve a budget that would include in the budget assumptions and the financial forecast an increase.
Okay. That's helpful.
What are you talking about? You can do whatever you want to do. A future board can reverse it, but they won't because they never do, and it's the way it is.
In terms of us adopting a kind of a general policy around, we had talked before about a policy that would say, when will we trigger a fare increase? And I just think that's, it would be nice to have such a thing, but I think it's really difficult because there are so many factors that go into the financial health of the agency, as we've discussed. So kind of a mechanical yes, no, sort of when do we trigger a fare increase is I think would be a challenge. I think we've got to respond to the current situation. I am prepared to give you my views of these proposals, but perhaps we should hear preliminary from everybody first before we do that. So,
okay. Ozzy, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President Simmons. My question is in regards to the impacts to the low-income fare program. At this time, I do not recall any mechanism in the low-income fare program that adjusts, maybe I'm wrong, that adjusts the threshold for being able to qualify for the program based on changes in the cost of living and the changes to adjusted median income in Oregon. I know those numbers are changing, so I wondered if this discussion we're having today is completely decoupled from that program. My assumption is that any mechanism to increase the threshold over time because of cost of living will also have impacts to the size of that program. Thank you, John, for taking the floor. Can you please speak a little bit on that program's impact, if any, and if there's such a mechanism in place to increase that threshold over time?
Good morning, President Simmons, Director Gonzalez, great question. And I'll circle back to what Executive Director Young had spoke to. First, I'd say all of the low-income fare program is indexed to our honored citizen fare number. It was developed to be half the cost of the adult fare. And as Nancy mentioned, part of the public participation outreach we would be doing is getting a sense of the impacts to low-income and minority communities and right-sizing that impact related to these subsidized fare programs. So what she spoke of is looking for using some of the external resources to reduce the burden to those low-income populations, youth populations, and honored citizens, seniors, and individuals with disabilities. What that would look like, that's what the public engagement would be for, to inform that. But we do our best to have mitigations in place to, I wouldn't say hold folks harmless, but hold folks as harmless as possible. But
What do you mean hold folks harmless? This doesn't help anybody. This is regressive policy. This is banks getting involved. This is extraction of wealth. This is bad. There's nothing good about it at all. Zero.
the rate as it looks on the screen there is what it would look, but there might be ways to actually absorb that extra increase to maintain the fares at the current status. So we could possibly, I believe, use STIF funds to maintain a youth fare at the current level while raising adult fare. Right? Now that would be part of that community conversation. So you could potentially decide to direct staff to move forward with a fare increase, but also ask us to look for additional mitigations or other resources to buy down that cost, because it's still a cost, but buy that down through external sources. And that would be the conversations we would have with.
There's no external sources. They're not willing to reallocate any money internally. You know, the biggest part of this budget goes to capital projects, not to service. They're not willing to change that. You know, service is always taking a back seat to capital projects at this place.
With the community over the next few months.
John, I might have misunderstood Ozzy's question, but I was under the impression, and Ozzy, correct me if I'm wrong, that you were talking about changes to thresholds to qualify for the low-income fare program, because right now it's 150% below the poverty line.
It's up to 200% in federal poverty, and so we have a low-income fare policy that exists. So as the federal poverty rate increases or changes, that's how it's indexed. It's not localized.
Okay.
And that's why we use TANF and Section 8 and other state and federal social service programs to qualify.
Because I thought Ozzy was saying if more people will qualify because of changes in the standard, will there be more money available to support the low-income fare? Is that what you were asking, Ozzy?
I didn't hear that.
Yes, that's where I was going. President Simmons, thank you for the clarification.
That's not. I don't know what he was asking.
So right now people qualify based on a certain percentage below the poverty line. And what Ozzy's saying, if that line goes up, which would make more people eligible, will we increase the amount of funds for low-income fare to address the increased population that would qualify?
I think it would be a good place to be, to have so much.
The federal policy guidelines, by the way, a family of one, an income of $13,500. Okay, that's like, you can't live on that. You die if that's your income in every state in the country. Family of two, 18,000. You die.
Participation as one of the strategies Nancy mentioned earlier, that we needed to set aside even more resources. That hasn't been our experience. So right now, over 300,000 people in our region technically qualify for the fare. We don't have that level of ridership. Now we're looking to get as more riders. So at some point in a future meeting, we could have a conversation with the STIF committee about increasing the allocation. That's not where we're at now, but I do think with increased marketing and outreach and getting people to sign up and participate and ride, that could be a reality we would face, yes.
Yeah, because the last 2 years of the STIF funding, we didn't utilize all of the resources available for
right,
the
so as we went from 100 million rides to 60 million rides, right, that means 40% of our STIF funds weren't used as well.
Right. Does that answer your question, Director Gonzalez?
It does, thank you.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't answer anything. It doesn't make sense to me at all. I don't know what he's talking about. Technocratic baloney.
Going back to the point, I suppose, to this matter here for fare increases, I think that it's good for the general order to understand that our low-income fare program will remain in place. It sounds like it automatically gets adjusted based on its policy definition to follow the rate of poverty. And we anticipate in our region that this will have some impact to how many qualify, how many can apply, and it's unclear whether they will have any impact from the discussions we're having today about fare increases.
See how they talk on and they don't really say anything. I mean, what's the point of talking if you can't be clear on what you're saying?
It looks to me on the surface as though there are no impacts to our low-income fare riders and qualifying low-income fare households in our region. That gives me great comfort if that is indeed the case. Could you just clarify, John, are we in a position where these discussions of fare increases do not present any immediate direct impact to the low-income fare program?
What I would say, Director Gonzalez, is that staff will have to work with the community to mitigate those impacts. So anytime you increase costs, it affects everyone, and I think that's what everyone's been speaking of. So for example, if we suddenly enrolled 50,000 riders into the low-income fare program, that would be very expensive, and it would impact our budget and our ability to provide that mitigation.
What are you talking about? You're still getting revenue. And if they qualify, they should have it. So he's whining about, oh, if we have too many people on our fare program, we're going to have money problems. This is disgusting.
Now, I think I would caveat, at some point we would probably have to go back to the STIF committee and ask for a greater share of the STIF funding to cover that subsidy. But as it stands now, we do have the ability to mitigate the current level of ridership and participation in the low-income fare program. And I would say up to even more riders. There is a threshold, but I think we're a few years away from hitting that in terms of participation.
Thank you.
Nancy?
President Sims, I do want to clarify something that you said in your opening remarks about the $200 million, and I just want to clarify for everyone. Our audited financial statements have come out. That will be posted to the website if you don't have them already. But just purely looking at for fiscal year 2022, our operating revenues were $77,703,000. Our operating expenses were $760,566,000. We have an operating loss of $682,863,000. Then you apply the employer payroll tax, and then you apply our federal formula funding. So I just want to clarify that so it's factual.
Yeah, it was on page 19 of the audit report that was for FY23 and indicated that the cost was something, I'm going from memory, of $793, and that the revenue was $200 million shortfall from that. So anyone who wants to look at the audit report, check out page 19, and it's covered there. Okay. Director Kim?
Two thoughts. One quick comment in response to another board member's comment earlier. So as I think about that, revenue development strategy, I'm thinking less so in terms of binding future agency, future board rate. I'm thinking more of how our previous ordinances were in place and have impacted us.
There's never been an issue. I've been watching this shit since Passador. This kind of thinking has never come up, and there's been nothing like this that's ever happened. He's talking about how will our ordinance impact the future. It's never happened, okay, and it never will happen. I don't know. They don't know really anything about TriMet is the problem with these boards. I know more about it than they do because I've been following this material all this time. These people come in, they don't know anything, and all the information they get is from Sam.
Sort of like, let's say, our wonderful D&I effort. We came up with a strategy, we came up with direction, and we have a policy, and we work towards that. So that's what I'm thinking. And for that sort of a strategy, I'm not thinking of anything extraordinary here. It could literally be us as an agency, us as a board, acknowledging and agreeing that our strategy is that fare revenue be a catch-all when it comes to meeting all of our spending needs, so that it will continue to match our needs, and so that it would go up. It could be anything like that. So I just wanted sort of a overarching strategy for us to point to. When it comes to the question at hand today, Thank you for the limited scoped questions there. As for me, it would be the smallest, so fare increase in amount of the smallest range that is as far out as practically possible, not just to allow for more time to socialize fare increase and so forth that we've identified as pros, but for our entire board to align and perhaps next year, perhaps the year after, and to point to that overall revenue development strategy and say, now that we're in complete alignment, let's go for more tangible steps. Until then, I think my stance would be to go for, as if and when we must, to go for the smallest practicable fare increase that is as far out as possible. Thank you.
You shouldn't be talking about fare increase at all right now. Gas prices up. Inflation is up. Rent is up. Food is up. Everything is up. And here you want to charge more. So they're just following this policy of squeezing the serfs. Everything is more. They're going to squeeze the life out of us. They're doing it as I speak. Nobody seems to be paying attention to it. They're boiling, and they're like the frog in the warm water that's slowly being boiled. They do not see what's happening, and it's happening right in front of their eyes.
Could you put the slide up that shows the three options? Yes. So what's before us today is not 20 cents in 2024. It's 20 cents in 2023. So as we look at which one we support, it gets greater the longer we wait because the need is greater. And so we're really looking at, would you support 2023? Would you support January 2024? Would you support September 2024? And whichever one you did, that's the increase that you're supporting.
Right, that totally makes sense to me as for what we're seeking here. But again, my response number one is, what are we doing here? What strategy are we implementing here, right? So it's just a reactionary measure each time, every year. That will work. That will get us to survival. But how can we be sure that we're thriving, or we will be thriving post 12 years when we don't have that wonderful strategy that we can point to?
The most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Who the hell knows where you're going to be in 12 years? Are we even going to be here in 12 years?
So I understand what we're wanting to do here, but that's my, thank you.
Director Kim? I just wanted to add that back in 2014 and then again in 2019, the board adopted what's called a strategic financial plan that Nancy referenced in her presentation, and then we went a little bit deeper into it at the last presentation. We'll get you a copy of that strategic financial plan, which Section 4 specifically addresses our fare policy. The board adopted fare policy, which I think feeds into this comprehensive strategy that you're referencing. I hope it does.
Yeah.
But we'll get that to you so that you can have that.
Yeah, yes, please. And to the extent that, fare increase in alignment with that policy, that makes sense to me. So thank you.
Yeah. Director Wai.
Thank you. I'm enjoying this discussion, so thank you for giving us a lot of time just to ask our questions. I am struggling with the current proposals here because I'm still trying to see the bigger picture of services that we're going to have in 2023, 2024, et cetera, the 10-year plan. And then going back to the ridership, just still trying to understand, the impact to people's pocketbooks for, a normal user, however the agency's defining it, and then again, how the 20 cent, 30, 40, et cetera, is going to impact them on a monthly basis. I feel like there's just still a lot of unknowns, and I understand our
It's not unknown. It's going to hurt people. It's going to hurt people. That's what it's going to do. You don't need to think about it. It's obvious. People that don't have money have to pinch pennies.
business reason in our case to have a fare box recovery plan. But it's just one part, right, of our entire system, our entire network. And so I appreciate the in-depth, looking at the 10-year and then, looking at the deficit. But in my mind, I'm going, well, we're still going to have a deficit. and I just feel like it's still unsustainable. It's still shaky in terms of, the revenue that we're relying on passenger fares for our operating costs. So those are just kind of my reactions.
And it doesn't come to that much revenue. It hasn't in years. Okay, it's not that much revenue. These fares are not going to change anything. We know the truth. It's the banks. The banks want extraction. The technocracy is moving forward, and the sock puppets will have to approve.
Actions to this, and let's see. I don't know what else I want to add in here, but I also just remembered there was a campaign, there was a slide on one of the pros of a fare increase, and there was a bullet point around, doing a public service campaign around, people ought to pay their fares. I remembered that campaign, and I remember it didn't land very well with some members of our community. They just felt like they didn't want to police, their neighbors who are riding next to them to just ask, hey, are you paying fare or not?
No, nobody's gonna. This is ridiculous, man. As we watch our country go down the tubes and the people enabling it.
I don't want to create that
That's
kind of.
not going to happen. You're going to have a bunch of fare Nazis walking around. And that's the other point of this discussion that's not getting discussed, is that it costs more to enforce the fares than the fares. Okay, they're not bringing that up at all. The amount of fares they're missing won't pay for the cost of fare inspection.
Of negativity in our system too, where we have to judge people of whether or not they're paying their fares or not. But that's just a comment. I just saw that bullet point and I was like, maybe we don't want to spend $1 million or millions of dollars, however that cost us last time, to do sort of a PSA around have you paid your fares.
Yeah, that was a huge failure. Remember when they tried to shame people into paying the fares? That blew up in TriMet's face. See, the problem TriMet has is that it has a sophisticated audience. Okay, we're very sophisticated in Portland about this. Other transit districts don't have that kind of sophistication in their populations, so they can get away with a lot of things that transit agencies can't get away with in Portland. It's a very sophisticated audience here, generally speaking.
But rather maybe the messaging going forward can be, the real thing that I think is really impacting all of us right now, which is it's expensive to get in your car, right? It's expensive to put a gallon of gas in your car, so choose public transit, right? Choose public transit as the cheaper way to save our planet, to minimize congestion, save your money, right? So that's just more of I'm going on a tangent. That's just more of a sort of maybe a messaging, marketing thing that we can do. In fact, I think we should be doing that already. We haven't, but going back to this, yeah, I'm just, again, still kind of struggling with just seeing the bigger picture of how does TriMet going to look like in 2024, 2025, etc. Once hopefully we get out of a pandemic.
Scamdemic. It's a scamdemic. Everything that's happened is because of the scamdemic. A controlled demolition of society took place intentionally.
How does going back to normal look like? So
there's no going back to normal ever. They've got us. We're on the reservation now.
I don't know. Those are just some of the comments and questions.
Director Bauman?
All right, we'll end on that because at least Way has some empathy towards the people. She's the only one that brings it up so far. Just disappointing, but I mean, I know who they are. I know what they do. They're not here to challenge the technocracy at all. And the ones that do, there's only been one that was a vocal challenge. His name was Lynn Learback. And he was thrown off the board by the corrupt Kitzhaber, who himself was disgraced later, as you Oregonians know. Anyway, that's enough for today.